The old school stood abandoned at the edge of the town, its windows broken and the paint peeling from its walls. The locals whispered tales of hauntings, but no one dared to venture inside. It was said that Room 13, in particular, held a sinister secret. Legend had it that a student named Emily had vanished from Room 13 years ago, never to be seen again. Some claimed to hear her cries at night, while others spoke of shadowy figures moving behind the grimy windows. Despite these warnings, a group of teenagers decided to explore the haunted school. Jake, Lisa, and Mark made their way through the overgrown yard and pushed open the creaking doors. The air inside was thick with dust and decay, and a chilling breeze seemed to whisper their names. They exchanged nervous glances but pressed on, determined to reach Room 13. As they navigated the dark hallways, they felt an unsettling presence following them. Whispers echoed through the empty corridors, growing louder with each step. When they finally reached Room 13, the door was ajar, as if inviting them in. The room was freezing, and an eerie silence filled the space. Desks were overturned, and the blackboard was covered in strange, cryptic symbols. Jake noticed a faint glow emanating from the corner, where an old, tattered diary lay open. He picked it up and began to read aloud. The diary belonged to Emily. It detailed her fear of a malevolent spirit that tormented her daily. As Jake read, a cold hand touched his shoulder, making him jump. He turned to find Lisa and Mark staring at something behind him, their faces pale with terror. A ghostly figure of a young girl stood in the middle of the room, her eyes hollow and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in. Emily's spirit was trapped, and she wanted them to share her fate. The door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. Panic set in as they heard Emily's sobs growing louder, mixed with a sinister laugh. The temperature dropped further, and their breath came out in visible puffs. Suddenly, the desks began to move on their own, forming a circle around them. The blackboard symbols glowed with an unholy light, and the walls dripped with a dark, viscous substance. Emily's ghost floated closer, her eyes filled with malice. Jake, Lisa, and Mark huddled together, trying to find a way out. The diary fell from Jake's hands, landing open on a page that described a ritual to banish the spirit. They had to act quickly, but fear paralyzed them. Lisa took a deep breath and began reciting the incantation, her voice trembling. The room shook violently, and Emily's ghost let out a piercing scream. The desks rattled, and the floor cracked open, revealing a fiery abyss beneath. Mark joined in, his voice steadying Lisa's. The blackboard symbols burned brighter, and Emily's spirit writhed in agony. The walls seemed to melt, and the temperature soared. Jake, finding his courage, completed the ritual with the final words. A blinding light filled the room, and Emily's ghost was pulled into the abyss. The floor closed up, and the desks returned to their original positions. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The door creaked open, and the teenagers stumbled out, their faces pale but relieved. They left the school in silence, vowing never to return. As they reached the safety of their homes, they realized they had escaped with their lives. Years later, the school was demolished, and a new one was built in its place. The legend of Room 13 faded, but the memory of their terrifying encounter remained. They never spoke of it again, but the fear lingered, a haunting reminder of the night they faced the ghost of Emily. The old school had been closed for decades, its corridors silent and classrooms empty. Yet, the stories of its haunted past persisted. Among the most chilling was the tale of Miss Hargrove, a teacher who met a tragic end in her very own classroom. Miss Hargrove was known for her strict discipline and unwavering dedication. But one fateful night, a fire broke out in the school. She was trapped in her classroom, room 22, and perished in the flames. Some say her spirit still lingers, seeking vengeance on those who enter. A group of thrill seekers, curious about the legend, decided to investigate. They entered the school at midnight, armed with flashlights and recording equipment. The air inside was heavy with the scent of burnt wood, and an uneasy feeling settled over them. As they approached room 22, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath fogged in the cold air, and they heard faint whispers echoing down the hall. The door to room 22 was scorched but intact, and it creaked open with a push. Inside, the room was eerily preserved, as if frozen in time. The blackboard still bore the last lesson Miss Hargrove had taught, and her desk was covered in a layer of ash. The group set up their equipment, hoping to capture any supernatural activity. As they reviewed the footage, strange anomalies appeared. Shadows moved across the walls, and faint outlines of a woman could be seen near the blackboard. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread filled the room. One of the group members, Sarah, felt a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped and fell to the floor, clutching her heart. The others rushed to her side, but an invisible force pushed them back. Sarah's eyes glazed over, and she began to speak in a voice that wasn't her own. "Why have you come here?" the voice demanded. "This place is cursed. Leave now or suffer my fate." The room shook violently, and the lights flickered. The group, terrified, tried to help Sarah, but the force held them at bay. Sarah's body convulsed, and she continued to speak in the ghostly voice. "I was wronged, trapped in the flames. No one came to save me. Now you will pay." The air grew heavy, and a foul stench filled the room. Desperate to escape, one of the group members, Tom, began reciting a prayer. The force seemed to weaken, and Sarah's body went limp. The room fell silent, but the sense of dread remained. They carried Sarah out of the school, her breathing shallow and ragged. Outside, the cool night air brought them some relief, but Sarah remained unconscious. They rushed her to the hospital, where doctors struggled to explain her condition. She eventually awoke, but her memories of the night were fragmented and hazy. The group vowed never to speak of their encounter, but the experience haunted them. They knew they had narrowly escaped a vengeful spirit's wrath. Miss Hargrove's ghost had made it clear. The school was her domain, and intruders were not welcome. Months later, Tom returned to the school alone, hoping to find closure. He entered room 22 and left a bouquet of flowers on Miss Hargrove's desk, whispering an apology. As he turned to leave, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Miss Hargrove's ghost, her eyes filled with sorrow rather than anger. "Thank you," she whispered, before fading away. The room warmed slightly, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Tom felt a sense of peace, knowing he had helped her find some solace. The school was eventually demolished, and a new building rose in its place. The stories of Miss Hargrove's ghost faded into legend, but those who experienced her wrath never forgot. They carried the memory with them, a reminder of the night they encountered a vengeful spirit in room 22. The old school had always been a place of mystery and fear. Long after it closed, the building remained, its corridors echoing with the whispers of the past. Among the many ghost stories, the tale of the janitor and the haunted basement was the most chilling. Mr. Thompson was the school's janitor for over 30 years. He was a quiet man, always seen but rarely heard. One day he disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only his cleaning supplies and an air of mystery. The basement, where he was last seen, became a place of terror. A group of paranormal investigators decided to explore the school, hoping to uncover the truth behind the haunting. They arrived at dusk, the setting sun casting long shadows on the dilapidated building. The air was thick with anticipation as they entered. The investigators made their way to the basement, the stairs creaking under their weight. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of dread filled their hearts. The basement door was locked, but a rusted key hung nearby, inviting them in. Inside, the basement was dark and musty. The flickering light from their flashlights barely penetrated the gloom. They set up their equipment, hoping to capture any supernatural activity. As they waited, a cold breeze swept through the room, carrying with it a faint whisper. One of the investigators, Emily, felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner. The figure moved closer, revealing the gaunt face of Mr. Thompson. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Emily tried to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. The other investigators noticed her distress and turned to see the ghostly janitor. Panic set in as Mr. Thompson's spirit moved through the room, leaving a trail of cold air in his wake. The equipment began to malfunction, lights flickering and static filling the air. The investigators heard the sound of chains dragging across the floor, growing louder and more menacing. Mr. Thompson's ghost seemed to be trying to communicate something, but his message was lost in the chaos. Desperate to understand, Emily picked up an old, dusty book from a nearby shelf. It was a journal filled with Mr. Thompson's meticulous handwriting. As she read, a horrifying truth was revealed. Mr. Thompson had been murdered and his body hidden in the basement. His spirit was trapped, seeking justice for his untimely death. The investigators realized they needed to find his remains and give him a proper burial. They searched the basement, following the ghostly whispers and the sound of chains. In a dark corner, they found a hidden door covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside, they discovered a small, makeshift tomb. Mr. Thompson's skeletal remains lay within, his body shackled to the floor. The sight sent a wave of fear through the group. Emily knelt beside the remains, whispering a prayer. The air grew colder, and Mr. Thompson's ghost appeared once more. His eyes were filled with sorrow and pain, but also a glimmer of hope. The investigators knew they had to act quickly. They carefully removed the shackles and gathered Mr. Thompson's remains. Outside, they dug a grave and laid him to rest, saying prayers for his soul. As they finished, a warm breeze swept through the area and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Mr. Thompson's ghost appeared one last time, his expression one of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, before fading into the night. The investigators felt a sense of relief, knowing they had helped a tormented soul find peace. The school was eventually demolished, and a new one was built in its place. The story of the haunted basement became a legend, but those who experienced it never forgot. They carried the memory with them, a reminder of the night they helped a ghost find rest and uncovered the janitor's secret.